Very much. And I just want to thank you all for enduring 5 weeks now of Bible study in Lent, and this is the 5th session, whereby we are focusing on holy matrimony or marriage. Of all the presentation, I think this one is a bit delicate, very, very sensitive in so many cases. And the primary reason for me being that issues to do with marriage, by and large, I think they have more to do with culture and the culture more than the text or the Bible itself. So I would also be very, very interested to hear your views, because I'm very, very sure that my cultural background is totally different from your culture. So in advance, I would also ask for forgiveness if it happens that somewhere along the presentation, I may step on the wrong ground. Just forgive me in advance. It will be out of ignorance, not deliberate effort or choice. So the sacramental understanding of marriage from an Anglican perspective, matrimony as a sacrament is designed to sanctify the lawful union of Christian partners. Already this presents a problem, because this is the Anglican claim. Our understanding from an Anglican perspective, traditional understanding is that we marry people who are Christians. This is the reason why in some parts of the Anglican communion, the practice is still there, that when people want to get married, to be married, especially in church, we have to ask or convince them somehow to be baptized, because the assumption is that this is a Christian marriage. Holy matrimony is a Christian institution. It should be, even the liturgy, follow the liturgy of holy matrimony in the Anglican Church. It clearly states that anyone who goes into this or gets into this union without fully knowing what they are getting into, they create problems for themselves. So already we have a problem, because this is the lawful union of Christian partners. So what happens then if somebody comes and they are not baptized and they want to be married in the church? Can you really say because you cannot be baptized, therefore you cannot be married in the church? Already we have a problem, but this is the basic understanding we have. In the Ephesians chapter 5, verse 32, it says marriage is a great mystery, and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. So this is where the sacramental base of marriage resides, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 32 following, whereby an analogy is being made between the relationship of those in marriage and the relationship between God and the church. But again, this verse or this passage might justify why the church consider marriage to be a lesser sacrament. Because if talking about Ephesians, this is no longer Christ directly giving instruction or talking to us. But maybe this is Paul now theologizing the whole concept of marriage. And in some instances, Paul would say, I am giving you this advice, not necessarily that this is what God says, but this is what I think as Paul. So already we have another problem, that marriage is a sacrament, is a lesser sacrament in the Anglican Church. The best, unlike baptism, unlike Eucharist, whereby we see Christ giving a direct instruction, in marriage, Christ is not giving a direct instruction to say, this is what I want, or this is what you should do as my followers. The disciples, the apostles, they are trying to theologize and teach us about marriage. But basically, the sacramental understanding of marriage is that it is an analogy, an logical relationship between the relationship of those in marriage and also the relationship between Christ and the church. Then when I was doing this research, then I said, if marriage or matrimony, holy matrimony, is not a major sacrament, but a lesser sacrament, implying that it is a sacrament designed at a later stage by the church or by the apostles, then when was it a sacrament before? When did marriage become a sacrament? Marriage has always been a sacred union of those in love, but it was raised to the dignity of a sacrament by Jesus and precisely by Paul or the apostles. You see, the only incident whereby Jesus was closer to a marriage ceremony was at the wedding at Cana. And it is from the wedding at Cana that we think that Jesus authenticated the holy matrimony. So it's just now an issue of theologizing and trying to make some sense and say, if Jesus devoted or spared some time to attend a wedding, the wedding at Cana, and not only attending, but participating meaningfully by contributing towards the wedding. So that means Jesus was for the idea. If he wasn't for the idea, he should have rebuked the whole event and said, this is a non-event. But Jesus contributed significantly by donating. He gave a very, very big donation in the wedding at Cana. So this is the closest period, or this is the closest time Jesus was in touch with the marriage, with the institution of marriage or marriage ceremony. So our theological or sacramental base of marriage is usually drawn from Paul and the other apostles. Now it is also very interesting, the moment we say it's a relationship, it's an analogical relationship between those in a marriage relationship and a relationship between the church and Christ himself. Then in a marriage ceremony or blessing of the marriage, the priest also plays a pivotal role. But in most cases, all things being equal, the priest is not the one who gives the sacrament of matrimony. He's only there as a witness, just like any other parishioners or congregants who are witnessing the event. In other words, the bride and the bridegroom give it to each other. So the most important people in a marriage ceremony, the bride and the bridegroom, the church is there to witness what's happening, maybe as the family of God. But in the traditional Anglican or Catholic tradition, marriage is expected to take place in the church. I'm not sure the culture right now in Canada. Where I came from, this tradition was strongly held or believed in, that marriage, holy matrimony, should take place in the church. I'm not really sure why, but it should take place in the church. I think the church being a symbol, somehow the traditional symbol of Jerusalem or the place of worship, but now with the kind of theology we have, especially after the COVID era, whereby people could not access their church buildings, then this claim to say marriage should take place, or blessing of marriage should take place in the church, I think it falls away. And in Anglican church back home in Zimbabwe, I said this was a very strong tradition. It was really severe, and it was strictly observed in the Anglican church. Till a point whereby around 2013, when there was conflict within the church, and one of the bishops was excommunicated, but unfortunately, the excommunicated bishop, he had political muscle. He was in favor of the government, so even the judiciary was biased towards him, and the majority of the Anglicans, he had a very, very small following, but he was the custodian of the church properties and the buildings. So the larger populace of the Anglican churches in the Diocese of Harare, they were worshiping now maybe in open spaces, in school halls, and renting other church buildings, other denomination buildings. So at that point, it was a 5-year period of exile, whereby people would not access their buildings and properties. And somehow theology changed. Some of these issues to say the church is very important when doing marriage, they were forgotten. People start having marriages in wedding gardens, outside, and other places. So this claim, this is a traditional claim for me to say it should precisely or specifically or strictly take place within the church building. Important elements in the sacrament of holy matrimony: the bride and the groom, the priest and the congregates, as well as the rings. The rings symbolizing the continuous relationship between those who have entered into a holy matrimony, and they were not expected to break. So those are some of, I know all these issues which I'm raising right now, we have different opinions, and I would be very much interested to hear your opinions after this presentation, and why the church would teach that marriage should be done specifically in the church building and not somewhere else. The sanctity of marriage is a sacrament. What are some of the physical elements that has got some spiritual resemblance when talking about marriage? The first element, which is very important, is love or unity. In a marriage, holy matrimony, physical holy matrimony relationship, love should be the most important or uniting factor. And as Christians, especially Anglicans, this unity is expressed through the idea of monogamy. Anglicans believe in monogamy. I'm not really sure again, is this idea of if this idea of monogamy bides general parishioners, especially in Canada. This might not be an issue because maybe in Canada that's not even a story. The culture doesn't believe in monogamy, I mean polygamy, I think. But in an African culture where polygamy is accepted, then we also have this problem whereby the church would teach and say monogamy is the godly way of doing things. But the culture would be saying polygamy is also accepted. So in this case, in an African setup, you would see that such kind of a principle would largely abide those in leadership positions, be it church wardens, priests, leaders, any kind of a leader in a church. The moment that person is engaged in an extramarital or in a polygamous affair, the church would say, look, this is not allowed. They would discipline that person. But if someone else, just a general parishioner, does it, the church would appear as if it doesn't, it's not seeing it. They will continue their lives. So this is interesting again, the idea of monogamy. But for the church, Anglican Church in general, this is a very, very important principle, the idea of monogamy, because it resembles this, this idea of unity among those who are in a relationship. A justified unit. Through matrimony, the two became one in Christ, and they are no longer two, but one body. And this is also expressed in the Trinitarian doctrine in the Anglican Church. The idea of unity in a marriage, the idea of monogamy in a marriage, is the same idea which we believe, or which can be equated with the Trinitarian understanding of the Anglican Church. That despite having these three persons in the Godhead, we believe in one God, believe in the unity of the Holy Spirit and everything else. So this is also very important. The idea of love and unity is also expressed in Paul's analogy of different functions of the same body. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 27. So this is also very important because talking about the Trinitarian doctrine, these are three persons in one Godhead, or in one God. And somehow in the historical life of the church or human beings, in the history of human beings, the three persons performed the different roles at different intervals, but they remained one. So equally the same, even in marriage, in the understanding of marriage. Though the two became one, they perform various different tasks within a marriage setup, but generally they are only one. This also speaks to the universalization of the church. The idea of unity in diversity is incorporated in marriage, physical marriage. It is also incorporated in the Trinitarian understanding of Anglican Church. We might be different, but we are one. So marriage, so that's the other important thing. And this also speaks to the issues of collaboration and issues of cooperation, companionship. In our differences, we collaborate, we coordinate, we are companions, we work together for one purpose. That's the simple or basic understanding of marriage. And this should also the relationship that should exist between Christians themselves. In our differences, we complement each other for the common cause of spreading the good news. In physical marriage, there's also an idea of continuity. And this is designed to continue. Marriage was designed to continue without divorce, except in the case of adultery. I think I will touch on this issue just shortly. But again, it's a controversial area. That marriage was made, right? It was made to be a continuous relationship, and divorce was not allowed from, especially from a New Testament perspective. From an Old Testament perspective, divorce was somehow allowed, especially considering that the Old Testament was a patriarchal community and so forth. So divorce was allowed. When Jesus came, then he spoke strongly against divorce, but gave a condition, except in cases of adultery. But I would think that Jesus was also a man, the human Jesus was also a man of his own time. That's my thinking. He was a man of his own time. In this context, this might have been very right, but in our context, I think we have other reasons that may justify divorce, and not only talking about adultery. I already stated some of those, especially issues to do with abuse and other issues. Bearing fruits. So in a marriage set up, it is also expected, even in the Anglican liturgy, that in a marriage set up, physical marriage set up, people are expected to bear fruit and to nurture them. And this is same applies from the sacramental understanding of marriage, the relationship between the church and Christ. The church is expected to bear fruits also, and also nurture those fruits. And some of these things we've already talked about them when we did baptism, especially baptism. However, fruits come from God. And this is, I think this is an interesting and strong message from Psalm chapter 27, verses 3 to 5, in Light with Children. We still have some liturgies in the Anglican Church right now, which states that marriage is meant maybe for one companionship. Then somehow it mentions that maybe children should be produced and also nurtured in a Christian manner. But some would say fruits of marriage, they are from God. We can only have the capacity to marry, but in terms of bearing fruits, then it comes from God. That's a gift from God. So not every marriage would bear the desired fruits, because the idea of bearing fruits, the idea of having children, from an Old Testament perspective, seem to have an issue geared towards the preservation of humankind from extinction. But also in the New Testament times, when Paul talks about monogamy and marriage, he, in many cases, Paul was addressing issues to do with adultery. So for him, Paul would see marriage as an institution which can safeguard people against adultery and fornication. I think those are some of the sacramental areas of interest when talking about marriage, but we also have other areas of interest which we might also need to take into cognizance when talking about marriage. For instance, the general understanding of the general understanding of Anglicans in view of marriage. I circulated a video on St. Peter's YouTube as well as Facebook. Some of you might have seen the video, and these are some of the highlights which I was giving in that video. We have this interesting relationship in the Anglican setup between the church and the state. And when talking about marriage, theologically, we have this question, we always have this question to wrestle with. Who is defining marriage in the Anglican? From an Anglican perspective, who is defining marriage? Because we have two systems here. We have a civic system, we also have a civil system, we also have a religious institution, which is the church. But as an Anglican as an institution, in view of marriage, does Anglican clearly have a definition of marriage? I think this, I know you help me on this one, but from what I know so far, the little knowledge I have so far, it seems like our understanding of marriage as an Anglican church is mainly determined by the state. It's mainly determined by the state. I'm saying this from what can I say? From maybe an interdenominational understanding, or whereby in other congregations, denominations such as the Roman Catholic Church, they have a clear definition of marriage. For one to be considered married in the Roman Catholic, they have a clear understanding. In other words, they have got a set of rules which clearly defines marriage from a church perspective. And one can be wedded in the Roman Catholic Church and not maybe wedded on a civil marriage, but still the Roman Catholic Church would consider that marriage, its own marriage, as the real marriage. If you want to go and wed in to have a civil marriage or union, that's something else. They don't care. But they've got a set of rules to say, this is how we wed. And it's very interesting because even now they are priests. They do not need to be licensed by the state, no. As long as they ordain you, you can marry people in the church, and the church would value that marriage to say this is the proper marriage. But not in the Anglican Church. Anglican Church, we have a liturgy, but we do not have a definition of marriage. Our liturgy is there to process or to facilitate or officiate on a state designed marriage. And this creates a lot of problem for the church. I stated this. I also stated in my slide that in many ecclesiastical provinces in the Anglican Church, the church issues a civil certificate. The church issues a civil certificate only, and the church certificate comes in form of the certificate of a blessing of a civil marriage. So our priests, our marriage officers, they are licensed by the state. If I wed people, if I marry people in this church, the moment I abide with the statutes of the state, then I'm not really obliged to give them another or the second certificate from the church. That certificate from the state is enough to say these people are married in the Anglican Church. So physically we would say, yes, the priest is there representing the church, but who is defining marriage remains an issue. The only thing we have done as an Anglican Church is for when people have been married by maybe a magistrate, they come to us, then we say, we are now blessing a civil marriage. So we don't have a marriage of our own. What we are doing, we are simply blessing a civil marriage. That's the other problem we have. And I've seen this now even in Canada. The brief time I've been here, going through the marriage liturgies, acts and canons of different dioceses in Canada, you'd realize that what the church believes or passes on synods is not inconsistent with what we have in the acts of diocese or the canons of the church. And I'm not sure whether we do not have the resources to align our synod resolutions with the acts and the canons, or else it's a deliberate effort just to pay a blind eye. So again, it remains another problem, because I would think that the moment we say as the Church of Canada, we believe this is our understanding of marriage, that should also be clearly stipulated in the acts and the canons of every diocese, at least the canons of the Anglican Church of Canada in general. In the Diocese of Montreal, they would tell you that we have passed that you can marry people of same sex in the church, but somehow informally they would also tell you that you need the bishop's permission to do that. So what are we saying? This has been passed in the synod, so why do I need the permission of the bishop to do that? So legally it has been passed. Practically, the church seems not to be completely in agreement of what they pass in the synod. Again, it presents a problem. But my issue is that as an Anglican Church, I think we still have this problem of following whatever the state say about marriage. And this is the problem. You would also notice that it creates a problem in the sense that we have, even in the Anglican Communion, we don't share the same concept or belief when it comes to this issue of marriage. What determines what the ecclesiastical province follow is their political settings and their cultural settings. So going to the province of Central Africa, they'll say one thing. Going to the province of Canada, they'll say another thing. Going to the to United States, to England, they'll be saying another thing. So this clearly shows that as a church, as a communion, we do not have this universal understanding of marriage. What is it? And this now distinguishes us maybe from traditional and maybe Roman Catholic Church, because at least um, in their intolerance and good bad theology, at least they are uniformed in a way. They don't, they are not confused in a way. That's the other thing that's the other challenge we face as an Anglican church. Very liberal and very confused in many cases. I'm sorry to say so, but that's that's who we are. So we have another interesting thing, the church and the biological family when it comes to the issue of marriage, because we are saying this is a union, a lawful union of Christians, implying that these people who are getting married, they should be well taught, and they should be well versed with the what Christianity say about marriage, or what the church say about marriage. They should be taught somehow. But the major problem I used to have back home, and now I think I still have the problem, is that in as much as we are saying we're having a Christian marriage or wedding, the only time when the priest would meet, or the marriage officer in the Anglican Church would meet the people to be married, is just a few weeks before the wedding. Just a few weeks. If the marriage officer is maybe generous enough, you would have at most 3 sessions of premarital discussions, that's all. Do you think that's enough to discuss the relevance and importance of Christian marriage in 3 sessions of 1 hour? You see, so you would realize that in many instances, the idea of marriage is a family idea. People are being taught from their families, and whatever they are doing is a thing usually they inherited, or they are being taught when they were growing up from their families. So the two families would know about the union or the relationship of those who are getting into this in marriage way during the infant stage of the relationship. The church would only be invited at a very, very later stage, just to authenticate or bless the marriage. I'm not sure if the church is doing justice or is doing enough. And in our liturgies, it seems this might be a common statement in all marriage liturgies. It's called the communion. Who gives this woman? And then in very instances, you would see maybe another woman coming forward and saying, I'm the one who's giving. In many instances, you would see a man stepping forward and saying, yes, I'm here too. Do you think that statement is fair? Is it still relevant? But it symbolizes the union of the families, somehow the families drawn into the picture. And as much as we are doing it in the church, we take cognizance of the fact that this relationship, for this relationship to work, these two families should agree, should bless this relationship. So as long as the families do not support the relationship, sometimes it's find it difficult to survive. So I think the church should somehow rethink or re-theologize. Coming to the issue of divorce, because whenever we talk about marriage, we cannot ignore the issue of divorce as a church. And from an Anglican understanding so far, we can bless a marriage in a church, but we can at least we can issue out a blessing of a civil marriage certificate.
But we cannot issue out a divorce certificate of some sort. We cannot do that.
Because we believe that marriage should be a continuous, lifelong commitment, despite the circumstances. This is the traditional teaching of the church.
People need to be made marriage forever. So when you come, we marry you. When you want to divorce, we try by all means to do some counseling, and maybe the moment we realize that this is not working, then we can say now you can go and file your divorce somewhere else. But as the church, we believe that what isn't bound in earth is also bound in.
So you realize that in many cases, the teaching of the church is good, that marriage should be a lifelong commitment. But we have people who have even lost their lives because of that teaching. Because they are Christians. They have been groomed and they have been taught that this is a lifetime commitment. The moment they want to step out of marriage, they'll feel that they've committed a grave sin. So they will hang on in a marriage which is very, very abusive, to the extent that at one of those days, another partner will lose their lives. Is it really important? Because I think we have already stated that life is the most precious gift. So the moment marriage ceases to be godly, then for me, there's no reason to stay in that marriage. There's every reason to move on with your life. And I would think that, strongly think that it is very, very true that God might hate divorce. But I also strongly think that God does not in any way hate those who have been divorced. Divorce itself might not be pleasing to God, but the divorcing itself, justified, I think He won't be committing any sin, as long as it's something which is to be godly. Matthew chapter 5, verse 31 to 32. Verses 31 to 32. Is also one of the interesting verses when talking about divorce. It has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. This is Jesus Christ now on divorce
in Matthew. I've already stated that. You see, Jesus Christ was very, very cognizant of the Jewish customs. And if you read this passage in Matthew, some New Testament thinkers, they call this passage an antithesis, because they would say Jesus was reversing what the Old Testament taught, or else he was reversing the teachings of Moses. But some progressive New Testament scholars would think this is in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5 is where we find the Sermon on the Mount, which is one of the most powerful sermons a collection of powerful sermons preached by Jesus while he was still on this earth. And for progressive scholars, Sermon on the Mount is somehow a super thesis, because whatever Jesus was saying in the Sermon on the Mount, he was not necessarily reversing what Moses was teaching. He was simply giving a simple instruction, but following whatever Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, then that means you don't need to listen to what Moses was teaching, because what the standards in the Sermon in the Mount are much way higher or superior than what Moses was teaching. So if you follow the Sermon on the Mount, then you won't be caught wrong by the Mosaic law. And this is exactly what Paul was teaching
when he talked about the law and grace, because Paul was simply saying, if you live according to grace, you won't be caught by the law anyway. You won't be caught offside when it comes to the law, because grace surpasses the law. So this is one interesting verse. But when Jesus said these words, I would think that somehow he was in a way protecting women, because he's saying whoever divorces this woman causes her. If you cause someone to sin, then the Bible will also tell me that you are a sinner yourself, a greater one. So you should avoid causing other people to sin or to fall into temptation to sin. So somehow Jesus was discouraging, and reading it contextually or historically, you would see that in the Old Testament custom or tradition, a man would just wake up and think they are no longer interested. The next morning they'll be writing a certificate of divorce, giving it to the woman. You can go. So Jesus was saying, no. I'm now giving you, except on the pretext of adultery. Anything else, you want to divorce your wife. This was Jesus' teaching. So somehow, in his context, he might have been right, because he was, in a way, protecting women. But this verse has got a lot of patriarchal connotations also. Because the one who is allowed to issue, Jesus is agreeing that the one who is allowed to issue a certificate of divorce is the man. And this also implies that even adultery, in the eyes of Jesus' contemporaries, was defined in view of women and not men. So again, this is one of those verses which are very, very sensitive and very patriarchal in nature. Anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So what does it imply? If you are a woman and you are divorced, then Jesus is simply saying, you should not be married again. That's what he's saying. Because every man would say, okay, if Jesus tells us that if I marry a divorced woman, I've committed adultery, then what next? Then I should not marry a divorced woman. But how does that work? And the Bible does not tell us what happens to the divorced man. It's only say divorced woman. So again, it's a very, very sensitive, and we need to properly theologize and read it in its context. As I conclude, I've got just a few observations. Marriage relationships are easier said than lived. Same applies to the relationship between God and the church. It's easier described than lived. The principle in marriage is very, very intact from a scriptural perspective, but the practice is fragile. People can only talk about it, but practicing it is another thing. However, from a sacramental understanding, marriage relationships are built on love between the two, which should spill over to all those whom they get in contact with. Same applies to Christianity. Christians are custodians of God's love, and that love should spill over to all those whom they get in contact with. So this is what I have in terms of marriage, a very, very delicate subject. And I would think that hearing your views would have great benefit, especially that now I am here in a different cultural setup. Your views would go a long way in shaping and also informing my thinking. Otherwise, I wish you a blessed day and be inspired in Holy Week. It has been indeed a wonderful pilgrimage, sacraments in the digital age, hope for the journey. Thank you very much. So at this time, I would maybe open the platform for further discussion.
Well, thanks to Piwa. That was certainly a provocative discussion of the sacrament of marriage, and lots to talk about there. I guess a couple of things at the beginning when we were talking about being sacramental and whether people should be baptized and whether this should be in the church and those things. The reality is, I think for a Christian, if people are asking for God's blessing on them, on their wedding, on their marriage, and they want to do that through the Christian church, it only becomes sacramental if the people presenting themselves believe it's sacramental and that God's blessing is going to do something to strengthen them in their marriage. And so if neither of them are baptized, the question becomes, well, so why do you want to be married in the church then? Why not just be married anywhere? And the problem is, a lot of times they want to be married in the church for one of two reasons. One is because mum wants me to be married in the church. And the second reason is, well, it's such a pretty church. And neither of which I think are good enough reasons to be married in the church. So if it's sacramental, then yeah, one of you needs to be baptized, and one of you at least needs to agree that they understand the vows that they're making before God and wish God's blessing on them, and in fact will hold themselves together accountable to God for those vows. So that'll start us off.
Thank you very much, Rod. So Rod is saying, yes, the church teaching is proper. For those who want to be married in church, they should at least be baptized.
Interesting. Any other insights? Thank you very much, Rod.
I just thought about a question. So I remember there was a passage that Paul wrote about marriage isn't for everyone. So like for those where it's a good thing, then they should do it. But if not, then just remain single. So what are your thoughts on that, of what people should kind of use as guidelines, whether they are meant for marriage or not?
Thank you very much. I think in that passage, Paul was addressing a specific problem whereby there was gross promiscuity within the church. And Paul would say the level of promiscuity among you is amazing. It's just serious to the extent that it surpasses that of heathens or unbelievers. So when you read that passage, you'd hear Paul using very, very strong language and using very, very strong words, because it is in the same passage that Paul would talk about someone who would take maybe their father's. Paul would say someone would take his father's wife. Someone would approach his father's. This is language. This is exactly what Paul says. He does not say someone would take his mother in marriage. He says someone would take his father's wife.
So implying maybe that was the mother should have been maybe a step mother of some sort, because Paul is not saying someone taking his mother, he's saying father's wife, implying maybe it's a stepmother. So people were having maybe love relationships with stepmothers. Paul would use the strong words as Paul are describing even homosexuality and other activities, serious activities. So Paul in that context then said, no, if you decide to marry, you need to make sure that you are going into the relationship fully knowing what is expected. You have to stick to your partner. You have to stick to your partner. And you have also to deliver what is expected in the marriage setup. You cannot be in it and not deliver the expectations. So this is what Paul was saying in this context. So the verse is very, very context specific. It's very context specific. Paul was not addressing an issue of maybe divorce or marriage in general. He was talking, his message was based on a specific context. And because of that, the frustration which Paul had,
in addressing this issue. Then he said at the end, it's good, yes, for people to be married, but it's even better if they cannot be married.
But at the same time, he's very cognizant of the fact that
Celibacy is also not something which should be taken for granted. It should come natural. It should be a gift from God. You cannot just decide that I don't want to be married, but you want to live as if you are.
married. I'm not sure if I'm communicating. Because you see, this is a very serious and practical problem. We have people who do not believe in marriage, right? But they believe in living like people who are in marriage. We have people who choose to be in celibacy, brothers and sisters in Anglican and Roman Catholic Church, but heavily involved in love relationships. So Paul would say, no, if you decide not to marry, make sure you are doing it perfectly. But if you decide to marry also, make sure that you maintain and keep one and single partner. Otherwise, you'll be judged at the end of the day.
Thanks, that gives it more context.
Thank you very much.
Tapiwa.
Yes,
It seems to me that if the church is going to call holy matrimony a sacrament, that it's partly the church's responsibility too to ensure that we're not just marrying because, mom is, a good member of the church, or because it may bring more money in. But I think we have a responsibility for education and, not only of the people asking for marriage, but those in the congregation as well. And I don't know that as the Anglican Church in general, we do enough work around that, educating people.
Yeah, I share the same sentiments with you that definitely the church needs to take this issue seriously and to do some kind of serious education when preparing people for marriage. And I think this is what Rod has been saying, that if they want to be married in the church, then they should be prepared to be baptized. The moment we say now we want to be married and they say, yes, we are prepared to be baptized, then we say, so let's commit ourselves enough time to orient you to Christian values in as far as marriage is concerned. I think that's the proper way to do. But I'm not sure how, Rod, you have been in the diocese for a long time, you have been in this context for a long time. I might have maybe passed a very unfair judgment concerning premarital discussions or premarital counseling. But I was talking from from where I came from, whereby people would come to me and say, we want to be married in the church. Okay, that's fine, fair and fine, that's okay. We schedule 3 sessions or 4 at most, something like that. You have to meet maybe 3 times, 1 hour, we have a talk about marriage, that's all. But Gary Chapman would say marriage is one of those oldest institutions. And the Chapman would say, if people are being in any other profession, secular profession, people would only be allowed to work when they are qualified. It's only in marriage whereby people would just get into marriage without being qualified. So that's Chapman's view, to say when you want to be a doctor, you need to train for 7 years, 5-7 years, to make sure that you won't make blunders along the way, grave blunders. So for someone to be, but people as Christians, we just believe that for someone to be married, for people to be married, they can be married just after 3 sessions of counseling or premarital discussions. And I think that's not enough. So I agree with you, Lori. So I would be glad to hear what Rod experience is like.
Yeah, well, I think your reality of it being kind of 3 or 4 sessions is kind of the unfortunate standard. There's a thing called the marriage course, at a really well put together Christian document, and it's a whole process. And I think one of the things I was wanting to do, but never quite got it done in my last parish, was to hold these not just for people who come to me and say, I want to be married, but for the community. This and the way this one works is you invite the couples to come, and there's a meal. They sit at a table, and the others all, so that you might get 10, 15 couples, and you have a meal together. And then there's presentation done by a couple about marriage, and then the couples have their own discussions at the table. And some work to go through, and then they have homework to take home. And this is, I forget, it was 8 weeks, 8 sessions, I think, but they're covering the major areas of relationship. They talk about money, they'll talk about sex, they'll talk about children, they'll talk about all the different kind of elements that to ensure that these couples have actually thought about these things, and maybe actually talk to one another about those things before they get hitched, and then say, kids? Who said anything about kids? I don't want kids, or whatever the issue may be. Or no, we're having 2 separate bank accounts. I'll have mine, you can have yours. We're not putting our stuff together and sharing it, despite what the vows might say. Anyway, so I think there would be an opportunity, a role for the church to really do something in the community, to put on things like that and offer them widely to the community. When the rate of divorce has gone to something like 50% or whatever it is now, it's clearly it's not working too well for the society. So, and I think the church could play a role in that.
No, thank you very much, Rod, for that, for those insights. I do agree that surely there might be a need for the church to have something like that in place, whereby people should go through a certain number of sessions, all those 8 or so sessions. I think it might help, because the greatest challenge we have in marriages is the challenge of surprises. So the moment we get into marriage without being prepared, then whatever we encounter in a marriage setup comes as a surprise. And all the accidents, is 98% we have, be it car accidents, the result of surprises or unpreparedness. So thank you very much, Rod, for that, for sharing that. I think I would also ask you to, if you could share with me the author of the book. It's a very important book for me to have it in my library too. Thank you very much.
I have a question, or just to get your opinion or perspective. So I believe in First Corinthians, Paul mentions that he believes it's okay for Christians to marry non-Christians, and part of the reason was because a Christian could lead his or her partner to Christ through that relationship. I just wanted to get your opinion on that or perspective.
Maybe I missed something, but from what I heard, you are referring to a passage whereby Paul encouraged or discouraged people from marrying unbelievers. Is it this passage?
I think so. I can't remember which chapter in First Corinthians, but I think I read it maybe a month or 2 ago.
Yeah, Paul, surely you are right in pointing out that passage whereby Paul taught that it's good for people of same faith to be married to one another, and it's not really healthy for a Christian to marry an unbeliever. And this might also be a solution to our problem of baptism. Because once we say we encourage believers to marry believers, then the issue of baptism falls away. But equally the same, sometimes it's not practical. sometimes it might not be practical, because we are saying what should take precedence in uniting people in a marriage setup is love. So if somebody falls in love, gets in love with an unbeliever, and they really go along and they feel that we are meant for each other, then as a church, I don't think we can be in a position to discourage that relationship. But of course, we can encourage the other partner who is an unbeliever to come to church, then get baptized, become a believer, then get married in the church. So Paul, yes, he said that in the same passage. Then Paul also clearly said that for those who have been married to unbelievers, do not initiate divorce, right? But if they initiate divorce, if an unbeliever initiates a divorce, then you have to accept it. So Paul was very, very complicated. His theology is very complicated. He was a wise man, because in other words, what he was just dealing with in this case was issue of conscience. So because I think he's coming from a Jewish background, Jesus teaching that when you divorce someone, you cause someone to sin. So Paul say, if you have married an unbeliever, don't divorce her, because if you divorce her, your conscience somehow would haunt you. But if that person initiates a divorce, then you can accept the divorce. But that's in other words, I've heard what you've said, but my personal opinion is that in as much as the church would encourage believers to marry each other, I think it's not sometimes it's not practical. If you find someone else who's not a believer, but you have enough time to date and also understands each other and see that this person we can have a life, there's nothing wrong in marrying that person. In the process, if you're a believer, in the process, especially when you're still in that deep love in the process, I would think you should have a way of maybe convincing the partner to be a believer also. You should have a way, because definitely in the long run, it creates a problem. In the long run, it might create a problem. It might create a problem because you are a believer, someone whom your partner is not a believer. And according to Chapman, spirituality is one of those very, very important aspects of marriage. You need to share some kind of common spirituality, because a human being is a physical and a spiritual being. So if you agree physically that we can match, then take your time to see if you can also match spiritually. So I think that is exactly what Paul was trying to teach, that people need not to take for granted issues of spirituality when it comes to marriage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you. You have been hiding. Right, friends, thanks very much for this opportunity. I wish you a blessed day, and God willing, we'll continue with this kind of discussions. They are very, very helpful for us and for me too. You have a blessed week. See you on Thursday.